The November rain had been falling on Washington, D.C. for 3 straight days, turning the city into a watercolor painting of grays and muted blues. Leo Matthews pulled his security uniform straight as he prepared for another night shift at the National War Memorial, the droplets still clinging to his jacket from the sprint from his car to the employee entrance. At 23, he carried himself with the rigid pride of someone who had something to prove, not just to the world, but to himself. His father had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, his grandfather in Vietnam, and here he was, guarding a building full of their ghosts. It wasn't the military career his family expected, but it was service nonetheless, and Leo treated it with the reverence of a sacred duty. The memorial closed to the public at 8 o'clock sharp, but Leo's real work began after the tourists left. He walked the marble halls with measured steps, checking locks, ensuring the displays remained untouched, protecting the artifacts and memories housed within these walls. Each name etched into the bronze plaques represented a life cut short, a family forever changed, a sacrifice that demanded respect. Leo understood this intellectually, had memorized the statistics and the stories, but at his age, death still felt like an abstract concept, something that happened to other people in other times. Tonight felt different from the moment he began his rounds. The usual evening cleaning crew had finished early, leaving the building in an unusual silence that made every sound echo with unnatural clarity. Leo made his way through the main exhibition hall, past the Vietnam section with its wall of names that seemed to stretch forever, past the World War II displays with their faded photographs of boys who looked younger than he was now. The building itself seemed to breathe around him, expanding and contracting with the weight of history it contained. It was nearly 10 o'clock when Leo heard it, the unmistakable squeak of rubber wheels against polished floor. He froze, his hand instinctively moving to his radio. The memorial had been cleared and locked. He had checked every entrance himself. The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by labored breathing. Leo moved quickly but quietly toward the source, his training taking over. As he rounded the corner into the main rotunda, he saw him. An elderly man sat hunched in a manual wheelchair, pushing himself forward with trembling arms. He wore a faded brown overcoat that had seen better decades, and his white hair was thin enough to show the pink of his scalp beneath the fluorescent lights. But what struck Leo most was the determination in his movements, each push of the wheels deliberate and purposeful, heading directly toward the restricted valor chamber, the memorial's most sacred space where the Medal of Honor recipients were commemorated. "Sir, excuse me, sir," Leo called out, his voice echoing off the marble walls as he jogged toward the intruder. The old man didn't stop or even slow down. Leo quickened his pace, overtaking the wheelchair and positioning himself directly in its path. "Sir, the memorial is closed. You need to leave immediately." The old man finally stopped, his chest rising and falling with effort. Up close, Leo could see the deep lines etched into his face, each one telling a story of its own. His eyes were a watery blue, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they fixed on Leo's face. "I need to see him," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying an urgency that made Leo uncomfortable. "Today's the day. 50 years. Sir, I understand you might have a personal connection to the memorial, but rules are rules. The building is closed, and the Valor Chamber is restricted access even during regular hours without special authorization." Leo kept his voice professional but firm, the way they'd taught him in training. He spread his stance slightly, making himself a more imposing barrier. "I need you to turn around and head toward the exit. I can arrange for you to come back tomorrow during visiting hours." The old man's hands gripped the wheels of his chair tighter, his knuckles white against the worn rubber. "You don't understand, son. Tomorrow won't work. It has to be tonight. It has to be now." His voice cracked on the last word, and Leo saw something in his eyes that looked like desperation mixed with profound sadness. Leo felt his frustration building. He'd dealt with difficult visitors before, People who thought their personal connections to the memorial meant the rules didn't apply to them. But there was something different about this man, something in the way he held himself despite his obvious frailty, a bearing that seemed familiar yet indefinable. Still, Leo had a job to do, and that job meant protecting this place from everyone, regardless of their stories or their pain. "Sir, I'm going to have to insist. This is my final warning before I call for police assistance." Leo pulled out his radio, holding it where the old man could see it, hoping the threat would be enough. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." The old man looked at the radio, then back at Leo's face. A bitter smile crossed his weathered features. "Police? Yes, I suppose that's what it's come to." He shifted in his chair, and Leo tensed, ready for a confrontation. But instead of trying to push past, the man reached slowly into his coat. Leo's hand moved instinctively to his hip, where a weapon would have been if he'd been authorized to carry one. What emerged from the coat wasn't a weapon or even an identification card. It was a worn leather box, the kind that had been popular 50 years ago. The old man's fingers shook as he opened it, revealing a piece of blue silk ribbon attached to a 5-pointed gold star surrounded by a green laurel wreath. Even in the harsh fluorescent lighting, the medal seemed to glow with its own inner light. Leo's breath caught in his throat. He knew what he was looking at. He'd seen pictures, read the descriptions, but never in person. This was the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration the United States could bestow. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Leo's entire worldview shifted in that moment, the carefully constructed hierarchy of his universe rearranging itself around this small piece of metal. The man before him wasn't just another veteran with a sob story. He was one of the few, the chosen, the ones who had gone above and beyond the call of duty in ways that most people couldn't even imagine. "My God," Leo whispered, his hand dropping from his radio. "Sir, I didn't know." "I'm so sorry." The old man carefully closed the box and tucked it back into his coat. "How could you know? I don't wear it on my sleeve." He looked up at Leo with those watery blue eyes. "Son, I haven't asked for special treatment in 50 years. But tonight I'm asking, let me see him, please." Leo's training warred with his humanity. Everything he'd been taught said to follow protocol, to maintain security, to treat everyone equally under the rules. But standing before him was a living piece of history, a man who had earned the right to break a few rules through sacrifice Leo couldn't even fathom. He looked around the empty memorial, listened to the rain pattering against the windows, and made a decision that would change both their lives. "Follow me, sir," Leo said quietly, pulling out his keys. "But we need to be quick." Dived. As he unlocked the heavy oak door to the Valor Chamber, Leo couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a threshold into something larger than a simple security breach. The old man wheeled himself through, and Leo followed, closing the door behind them. The chamber was smaller than the main memorial halls, more intimate. The walls were black granite, polished to a mirror finish, and carved with the names of Medal of Honor recipients who had died in service to their country. Small lights illuminated each name from below, creating the effect of stars in a night sky. The old man rolled forward slowly, his eyes scanning the wall until he found what he was looking for. He stopped before one name among hundreds. Corporal Marcus Torres, United States Army, Vietnam, 1974. The man reached out with one trembling hand, but stopped just short of touching the stone. "We were 19, he said, his voice so quiet, Leo had to lean forward to hear. "Can you imagine that? 19 years old and thinking we were invincible. Marcus was from East LA, joined up the same day I did. We went through basic together, shipped out together, survived our first firefight together." He paused, lost in memory. November 15th, 1974. That was the day everything changed. Leo found himself sitting on a bench near the wall, drawn into the old man's story despite himself. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming against the memorial's roof in a steady rhythm that seemed to underscore the man's words. "What happened that day?" Leo asked, surprising himself with the question. The old man, who had introduced himself as Robert, though Leo suspected that wasn't the name he'd gone by in Vietnam, kept his eyes on Marcus Torres's name as he spoke. Charlie hit us at dawn. We were supposed to be in a secure zone, 5 clicks from base camp. Intelligence said the area was clear. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Intelligence was wrong. They came at us from 3 sides, had us pinned down in a dried-up rice paddy. No cover except for a few scraggly trees and an old Buddhist shrine that had been bombed out months before. Robert's hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair as he continued. I took shrapnel in both legs in the first 5 minutes. Couldn't walk, could barely crawl. The medic was dead, half our squad was down, and Charlie was closing in. That's when Marcus did something I'll never understand, no matter how many years pass. He could have made it to better cover, could have saved himself. Instead, he came for me. Leo watched as tears began to roll down the old man's weathered cheeks, but Robert made no move to wipe them away. He threw me over his shoulder like I weighed nothing, even though we were about the same size. Started running through open ground while machine gun fire kicked up dirt all around us. I was screaming at him to put me down, to save himself, but he just kept saying, "Not today, Bobby, not today." The chamber fell silent except for the sound of rain and Robert's labored breathing. Leo found himself holding his breath, waiting for the rest of the story, even though he could guess how it ended from the name on the wall. "We almost made it," Robert continued. "Could see our guys laying down covering fire, could see the tree line where we'd be safe. Then Marcus stumbled. I thought he'd tripped, but when he got back up I saw the blood spreading across his back. He'd been hit, probably more than once, but he kept going. Carried me another 50 meters before his legs gave out. Even then, he dragged us both into a shallow ditch, covered me with his body when the mortars started falling." Robert finally touched the wall, his fingers tracing the letters of his friend's name. "He died on top of me, still shielding me with his body. They found us 6 hours later when reinforcements finally arrived. Marcus had 7 bullet wounds and enough shrapnel in him to set off a metal detector from across a room. The medal," he patted his coat where he'd returned the box. "They gave it to me because I held our position in that ditch, kept firing back even after Marcus was gone, supposedly saved 3 other wounded guys by keeping Charlie from overrunning us. But the truth is, I was just angry and scared, and trying to make sense of why my best friend was dead and I wasn't." Leo felt a lump in his throat. He'd heard war stories before, had grown up on them, but hearing one in this place from someone who had lived it made it real in a way that no book or movie ever could. "You earned that medal, sir. You survived, and you saved others." Robert shook his head slowly. "Son, you don't understand. I've carried that medal for 50 years, and every day I wake up wondering why Marcus didn't get one too, why the one who did the carrying got forgotten, while the one who got carried became a hero. They told me it was because he didn't survive, that the Medal of Honor for his actions would have been posthumous, and they'd already awarded too many that year." He laughed bitterly again. "Too many. As if there was a quota on recognizing sacrifice." The old man turned his wheelchair to face Leo directly. "I come here every year on this day, the anniversary. My daughter usually drives me, but she's sick this year, cancer treatment. Told her I'd skip it, but I couldn't. Had to take 3 buses and wheel myself 6 blocks in the rain, but I had to be here, you understand?" Leo nodded, though he wasn't sure he could ever fully understand the weight this man carried. "How long do you need, sir?" "Just a few more minutes," Robert said, turning back to the wall. "I like to tell him about the year, about my kids, my grandkids. His mother died 5 years ago, and I promised her I'd keep visiting him, keep saying his name so someone remembers." Leo stood quietly as Robert spoke to the wall, updating Marcus Torres on a year of life he'd missed, on 50 years of life he'd never had. He talked about his daughter Patricia's diagnosis and treatment, about his grandson starting college, about the VA hospital where he volunteered teaching young veterans how to adapt to their prosthetics. It was a one-sided conversation that felt more like a prayer or maybe a confession. As Robert spoke, Leo found himself thinking about his own service here at the memorial, how he'd treated it as a duty, but perhaps not as a calling. He'd been so focused on the rules, on maintaining order, that he'd forgotten what this place really was. Not just a building full of artifacts and names, but a bridge between the living and the dead, between the past and the present. Every name on these walls had a Robert, someone who carried their memory, their sacrifice, their story. "You know," Robert said suddenly, pulling Leo from his thoughts, "Marcus would have been 70 this year. I try to imagine what he'd look like, grey-haired and wrinkled like me. Maybe a little fat from his wife's cooking. He always talked about the girl he was going to marry when he got home. Maria, her name was. She married someone else eventually, had a good life, but she sent me a letter once saying she still dreams about him sometimes, still young and laughing." The emotion in the chamber was almost tangible, thick enough that Leo felt like he was breathing it in with every breath. He thought about his own grandfather, who had come back from Vietnam but never really came home, who had died when Leo was 10, taking his stories with him because he couldn't bear to tell them. How many Roberts were out there, carrying these invisible wounds, these survivor's guilt that medals couldn't heal? "Sir," Leo said softly, "would you like me to leave you alone for a while?" Robert shook his head. "No, son. If you don't mind, I'd rather you stay. It's been a long time since I told anyone the whole story. My kids, they know I have the medal, know I served, but I never wanted to burden them with the details. But you, working here, surrounded by all these names, maybe you need to hear it. Maybe that's why I ended up here tonight when you were on duty." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the rain creating a cocoon around the memorial that made it feel like they were the only two people in the world. Finally, Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph, yellowed with age and soft from handling. He handed it to Leo. It showed two young men in army uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the confidence of youth. Leo could see Robert in the one on the left, 50 years younger, but with the same kind eyes. "That was taken 3 days before," Robert said. "Before everything changed. I want you to have it." Leo started to protest, but Robert held up a hand. "I've got copies. But I want someone here, someone who guards these names every day, to know that Marcus Torres was more than just letters on a wall. He was a kid who loved baseball and his mother's tamales and stupid jokes that only made sense if you were 19 and scared out of your mind. He was real and he was brave, and he should be remembered for more than just dying." Leo took the photograph carefully, treating it with the reverence it deserved. "I'll make sure he's remembered, sir. I promise." Robert nodded, satisfied. "I should go. You've bent the rules enough for one old man tonight." He began wheeling himself toward the door, but Leo stepped forward. "Sir, wait. Let me walk you out. Make sure you get to your car safely." "I don't have a car, son. Like I said, buses and wheels." Leo pulled out his phone. "Then let me call you a ride. It's the least I can do." Utip. As they waited in the main entrance for the Uber Leo had ordered and paid for, Robert looked around the memorial one last time. "You know, this place, it's important. Not for old men like me, we'll be gone soon enough, but for young people like you to understand that freedom isn't free, that every generation pays for it in blood. But more than that, to understand that the ones who pay aren't just names on walls. They're Marcus Torres, who could have run, but didn't. They're kids who become heroes, not because they want to, but because someone has to." The car arrived, and Leo helped Robert into it, folding his wheelchair and placing it in the trunk. Before closing the door, Robert gripped Leo's hand with surprising strength. "Thank you, son, for listening, for understanding, for letting an old fool break the rules." "Thank you, sir," Leo replied, meaning it more than he'd meant anything in a long time. "For your service, and for teaching me what I'm really guarding here." As the car disappeared into the rainy night, Leo stood in the entrance, the photograph still in his hand. He looked at it one more time, at Marcus Torres's young, smiling face, then walked back into the memorial. He had rounds to finish, doors to check, a job to do, but now he understood that he wasn't just guarding a building or enforcing rules. He was standing watch over stories, over sacrifices, over the bridge between those who gave everything and those who lived because of it. He made his way back to the Valor Chamber, against all protocol, and stood before Marcus Torres's name. "I'll remember," he said quietly. "I'll make sure others remember too." Then he carefully placed the photograph in his wallet, where it would stay for the rest of his career, a reminder of the night a hero in a wheelchair taught him what heroism really meant and what it cost. The rain continued to fall over Washington, washing the city clean for another day. Another chance to remember, another opportunity to honor those who couldn't see the sunrise but made sure others could. And in the National War Memorial, a young guard named Leo Matthews continued his watch, forever changed by an old man, a medal, and a name on a wall that would never again be just letters carved in stone.